right. Thank you so much, Grace, for that prayer. Thank you, Aline, and thank you everyone for being here. Today, we will be talking about charity. And charity, as we will learn very soon, can really have lots of meanings, lots of interpretations, and But for the purpose of our discussion today, we're really going to talk about um, moral charity and material charity. And those terms come straight from the Gospel According to Spiritism, the book. And I would like to start by reading um, the, the Spirit's teaching. So, for those of you who don't know about the Gospel According to Spiritism, it's one of the books that was written by Allan Kardec, our the codifier of the Spiritist doctrine. And each chapter of the Gospel according to Spiritism really focus on different parts of the gospel, the word of Jesus and the apostles, and it really brings a spiritist light to the teachings of the Christ. And the one on charity is in chapter 13, which is entitled "Do Not Let Your Left Hand Know What Your Right Hand Is Doing." And in each chapter of the Gospel according to Spiritism, at the end of the chapter, there is these part called the Spiritist teachings, and these are communications that were received by spirits through Allan Kardec and the mediums. And this one sets the stage for what is material charity and moral charity. So I would actually like to read the whole thing. It's only about 2 pages, so it's not that long, and I think it will ground our discussion for today. So, and then it is item number 9. If you want to take a look at it, if you have the gospel, it should be the same in Portuguese as it is in English in terms of the chapter. So, chapter 13, item number 9, material charity and moral charity. Let us love one another and do unto others what we would want them to do unto us. End quote. Every religion, every moral possible is contained in these 2 precepts. If you were to abide by them in this world, you would be perfect. There would be neither hatred nor dissent. And furthermore, I will say that there will be no more poverty, because from the surplus of the table of each rich person, many poor people would be fed. And in the dark back streets where I lived during my last incarnation, you would not see poor mothers dragging along their miserable children in need of everything. You who are rich, think about this a bit. Help unfortunates as much as you can. Give so that one day God will repay the good you have done. And when you leave your earthly envelope, you will find a cortege of thankful spirits who will receive you at the threshold of a more blessed world. If only you could know the joy I experienced in meeting on the other side those whom I was able to help during my last life. Therefore, love your neighbor, love him or her as you love yourself, because you know that that unfortunate fellow you are rejecting and keeping away is perhaps a brother, a father, or a friend. And then what despair you will feel upon recognizing him in the world of spirits. I want you to understand fully what moral charity entails, the type that everyone can exhibit and which costs nothing materially, but which is nonetheless very difficult to put into practice. Moral charity consists in giving support to one another, and it is what you practice the least on the low order world where you are incarnate for now. Believe me, there is great merit in knowing how to keep quiet and let a more ignorant person speak. This is yet another kind of charity. Knowing how to turn a deaf ear when a mocking word escapes the mouth accustomed to scorn, not paying any attention to the smirk of disdain that greets your entry amongst persons who often wrongly think that they are above you, whereas in the spirit life, the only true life, they are sometimes far from it. These are meritorious acts, not of humility, but of charity, because not paying attention to someone else's wrongs portrays moral charity. This sort of charity, however, must not hinder the other kind. Remember especially not to neglect your neighbor. Remember all that I have told you. You must always remember that the poor person whom you reject perhaps houses a spirit who used to be dear to you and who, for the time being, is in a position beneath yours. I myself met again one of the poor of your earth, whom I had fortunately been able to help a few times, and from whom I must now, in turn, ask for help. Remember that Jesus said that we are all brothers and sisters. Always think about that before rejecting the leper or beggar. Goodbye. Think of those who suffer and pray for them. Sister Rosalie, Paris, 1860. So this was psychographed by Sister Rosalie in Paris in 1860. So that's why a lot of what I read was in the first person, right? So she is sharing her thoughts with us about charity. So I would like now to just go over some of the things that we heard in these reading. Right, the one that really stuck out for me right away in the very beginning, I think, yeah, first paragraph is you would be perfect if follow the maxim, and the maxim here is let us love one another and do unto others what we would want them to do unto us. It's it sounds so simple, right, when we say it like that, and we know the practice is not easy. But just to think about that, you would be perfect if you follow that saying, if you follow that maxim, that that helping others is really serves almost two purposes: for the repayment of God. So when we help others, we are also helping ourselves. We will receive much more back than we give. And the second part that she also said in there, the gratitude of other spirits. And in here we getting a little bit into already into reincarnation, which also these little passage, right, these 2 pages touch so much upon these system of reincarnation, these all just and all loving God that we have, that allows us to have reincarnation, to always progress. So she talks here, Sister Rosalie talks here, how, like, imagine how thankful and how happy those that you assist throughout your time here on earth, how they're going to be thankful to you now, and also when you come to our true life, which she says is really the only true life that we have, and that we should concern ourselves with. So thinking about what we get back from God when we do charity, and the joy, the love that we spread to our brothers and sisters, and how thankful they will be for when they receive it from us. Love your neighbor. Again, that message is definitely here, right? And we have learned from Jesus and from the saying in the beginning that the love and what love means, and it's really the one force that governs the universe, and that is the thing that we must practice. Love wins it all in the end. And that is where Sister Rosalie reminds us again: love your neighbor. That's our utmost directive from Christ. And then she goes into talk about, she starts then talking about what is moral charity and what is material charity. And with moral charity, she says it very, very clearly. It's actually something that everyone can do it. It costs us close to nothing, especially in a material sense, but it is the one that's very hard to put into practice. sounds almost like a riddle, right? We can say like, what is something that we can do? It costs us nothing, but it's really hard to do it, right? It's almost like a riddle, like, oh, it's moral charity. And and it's so right? If we really think about it, it doesn't cost us anything to stop and listen to someone, to stop and offer a word of support, to offer a smile, to say, oh, I noticed that you are not the same today. What's going on? Tell me. And sometimes that's all that people are like thirsting to hear from us. And sometimes we go through our lives, as busy as we are, and we are oblivious to what others are going through, even though we know what we are going through. So chances are that if I'm going through something, especially when we can think about in the context of a pandemic right now, or the social unrest that we're seeing throughout the world, that, well, if I'm feeling anxious about these things, or I'm feeling this way, excuse me, chances are that my significant other is feeling that way, or my coworkers are feeling that way. So why not just maybe, right, take a moment to say, hey, how are you feeling through all this? How are you doing? And let us, and I think especially in the culture that we are, I think, sometimes it's just easy to say, I'm good, and keep going, right? And we don't want to feel like we want to bother the other person with our story. And sometimes I find it so funny sometimes, then that we actually have to say, no, how are you really doing? Right? To just give the green light to the person to really tell you, Melissa, I'm having a really hard time, right? And then, okay, where do we go from here? So again, it costs us, everyone can do it. It costs us nothing, maybe time if we want to quantify something, but even then it costs us in terms of material, right? We don't have to pay anything, we don't have to give anything up, but it's the one that's very hard to put in practice. But she also says, do not forget material charity, because it is important, right? So, you know and when I read this, my mind went to I'm not sure if many people have heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Maslow, I forgot his last name, but was a psychologist that came up with a theory. This is many many years ago. Lots of sociologists, anthropologies use that to really to say that for human beings, right, we have this pyramid that is the hierarchy, and at the base of it are most of our material needs: food, shelter, a job, like things that we need to survive in the world. Because again, spiritism, or Christianity, we can turn an eye blind, a blind eye to that, right? Because if people don't have those basic human things, you can move on into the hierarchies, which, to give an idea without going too much or showing you the actual pyramid, the top of the pyramid. So if you think of a pyramid, it funnels up, right? So it's wider at the base, and then it funnels up. So the top is what he calls self-actualization, and in many ways, it's what many of us who are a little bit more privileged to have shelter, to have food. We don't have to keep thinking about survival every day. That we can start taking time to think about, yeah, what does it mean to love my neighbor? What does it mean to, we can start, engaging in other these higher level things if we think about that. I always thought that um, there was, when the tsunami hit. I remember this like it was yesterday, when the tsunami hit back in 2004. Now, right? Was it 2004? I think it was around that time. There was a piece of news that circulated throughout social media and all that time. And it was about a mother that had to like almost choose between like which kid to save, as the torrent, the currents are taking them. And at that moment I almost had an epiphany that that the only reason that some of us can take the time to think about those things is because we're not in that situation that she was, right? That she didn't have her basic needs met. So we can then engage in that. It almost sounds frivolous, right? That we are just talking about we're not in her situation, so being charitable like that. And that's another thing, right? Being charitable in our thoughts, being charitable in the way we put things out in the world. So who are we to judge? Who are we to do those things? So when we strip ourselves of like, I don't know how I would act if tomorrow, I lost everything, really, literally, if I became homeless tomorrow, right? Because it can happen. um, like, how would I act? And I think that's when, when we are in a position that we are looking to our brothers and sisters who are in a position, whether they be homeless or whether they are, they are in a situation in their life where they don't have the food, the shelter, those basic needs. It is so important to not take that for granted, and to be thankful for what we have, but also, really find within ourselves, okay, how can I help? How can I, um, and I know that in our groups here, when we used to do the studies more, I think we talked about these chapter before. And when we talk about moral charity, I think there's a negative connotation, that, or not a negative connotation, but just like, like, oh, I don't know what that person is going to do with the $10 that I just gave them. Are they going to buy drugs? Are they going to? But I think, it's not for us to decide, right? Like, we did our part, right? I think certainly there's something bigger to be talking about, like systematic. But many of us don't have a way to impact the system. So if me giving 5, 10, $1, whatever it is, I almost feel like, okay, that money now belongs to that person. They can do whatever they want with them, and I did my part. I'm gonna, send my good thoughts. But we also have to trust that. Imagine, imagine how we would feel if we were in their shoes and someone reached out, their hand and gave something material to us, right? um, so something to think about. And I know that, I know that I have people in my life that, have their own thoughts about material charity, and how that creates, maybe more need than it does. But I don't know, it's definitely something for us to talk about, to think about when we do material charity. And even when we look today to businesses and things like that, it's so much easier today to give a little bit, right? To give it to causes that we think are important to us and all that. I know that, like, my bank, if I wanted to, like, let's say if I spend, 750 on something, they can round up that to $8, and the 50 cents goes into, like, a charity of my choosing, right? And I'm not sure how it is in Brazil, but I know some financial companies are doing that here. So there are many ways to definitely give it, in terms of material. So that was, and the only thing that I liked about the material charity that Sister Rosalie brought to us is, and I touched on this a little bit, but it's the aspect of reincarnation, and especially that transitory aspect of reincarnation. Whereas today, Murillo has this shelter, has this food, and have everything, but in my next life, right, I don't know what's in store yet. So, if I'm to be on someone else's shoes, how would I want to be treated? And that's really the golden rule, as we say, right? Do unto others as you want to do it unto you. So we have to think about that maybe now I'm in this temporary position of power, social status, whatever you want to call it. But, you know a few days from now, a few weeks from, really, we never know. We can be in sometimes doesn't even take another lifetime. It can happen right here and then. So something for us to talk about too. Now, the other part of the material, and the moral and material charity, in the item number 10, and I'm not going to read item number 10, but the other thing that was really good too is how to practice charity. And they talked about 3 ways that we can practice charity. And it's kind of just to summarize here. We can do it through thought. And for the most part, that really translates to prayer, how we pray, how we send good vibrations to our loved ones, our enemies, the world. Really, just the acting of praying is charity in itself. So think about that. Words, and I kind of already alluded to that. So that's number two, words. So again, taking a moment to say something nice, taking a moment to use your words to empower others, that is an act of charity. It doesn't cost anything. It's easy to do, but sometimes hard to put into practice as well. And finally, deeds or actions, right? You actually doing something, and that can be words and actions, together. That could be anything where you are a little bit more active in certain causes, or again, just taking 10 minutes to ask somebody how are they doing, and choosing to engage with your fellow human beings. So that's how we practice charity. And it's important to, I think, almost think about, what they didn't say how we practice charity, right? They didn't say give money. They didn't say anything in particular. They said very vague. And I think because to leave us really with lots of options of how to do charity, and almost like no excuse not to do it, because again, it can be done in probably any situation that we find ourselves in. Now, the item number 10, the other thing that and I would suggest that you read it on your own if you have a chance. The other thing that was very clear in the item was a discussion on conscience. And we have learned here before that all these laws and all the morals of the world really are deeply ingrained in our conscience, and we should always turn to our conscience to know how to act, right? So even in this idea of charity, of being charitable, our conscience will nudge us on the right direction. Now, we may choose not to hear it, and that's where the problem lies sometimes, that we choose not to spend that extra time, or to spend that extra money, or whatever it is, material or moral, to do what our conscience is telling is the right thing to do. So let's listen. Let's take a moment to really listen to what our gut feeling, what our conscience is telling us at every crossroads that we come across. And then finally, to just close, so then we can move to our discussion. I wanted to just make reference to this book, and it is in Portuguese, but I'm not sure if I couldn't find it in English, but it's The Spirits of Truth. And Melissa should, Melissa should, Melissa, I'm gonna talk about that chapter that we both love, which, and it's actually, so this is actually how I got to the gospel according to Spiritism, items 9 and 10, because the chapter that I like about this book, it's chapter number 2, so it's very early on the book. By the way, The Spirit of Truth, this book, is it's a study of the gospel according to Spiritism. Doesn't have all the chapters, doesn't have all the items. As you see, it's not as thick as the gospel according to Spiritism, but it has an index that you can go in and you say, okay, like, does it say anything about this chapter? So you can do a little bit of a cross reference to see what the spirits in here are telling. And it is by Francisco Cândido Xavier and Valdo Vieira, but the spirits are various. So there's Emmanuel, there's André Luiz, and many, many others that we have come to know through the hand of Chico Xavier. But chapter 2 is about material charity, and it's entitled Access in You. And again, I'm not going to read it because it's in Portuguese, but I can certainly send it to the group later. But just a couple of highlights from that chapter. It's called The Access in You by André Luiz. And one of the first things that really hits you is this: André Luiz writes, Spiritism is charity in motion and begs us not to turn our homes into museums. Spiritism is charity in motion, and it begs us to not turn our homes into museums. So it's already telling you, like, look around, what's in excess that you don't use. Make that a habit of turning things around and passing things along. And it continues. And it's really that comes in, right. There's actually an English. I think it works better in English than in Portuguese, and I've only actually heard it in English. But the whole idea that one man's trash is another man's treasure, right? So what doesn't work? What doesn't work for me? What I were allowed. This thing is old. It's doesn't. It's no use to me anymore. Well, when you pass it forward, it might mean the world to someone else. So also something to think about. And then just throughout that chapter, there's so many simple examples that are shared with us, or things that we can look around in our houses and pass it on, give it forward. Food in our pantry, clothes in our closets, books that we don't read anymore, furniture that's just collecting dust and cobweb. So really, it really is a call to, like, look around you. What is it that you have around you that you can give it forward? And then it kind of closes with just making a really good commentary that the excess that we have in our life often results in our fellows need, in making someone that is actually in a needed position. And that's so deep, right? That to think that what I have in excess, someone else doesn't. And we see this every day. We can just turn on the TV to know that our brothers and sisters don't have as much as we do. And so how can we you know take those baby steps towards that, towards having that mindset of just saying, I'm not using this anymore. Does anybody want it, or does anybody need it? So I'm not creating that excess in my life, and I'm not creating a need in someone else's life. And of course, I think I just want to close by saying that the link between this and our the lovely prayer of Saint Francis is undeniable. That it is in giving that we receive. So I encourage you to look deep within your lives, and to look deep within your conscience of the things that you can give of yourself, whether morally or materially, so then you can receive tenfold, a hundredfold, a thousandfold back to you, and to your inner transformation. So thank you for your time and for listening, and we'll move on to our discussion part. And I'll go ahead and stop the video. And I'm not sure but I think, yeah. So I'll go ahead and stop the video for now. Thanks again.